Welcome into the FiredUP Network. I'm Gerald Bentley, joined by Rudy Reyes, and we are looking at the NFL draft that just ended. Rudy, if you had a chance to watch it on TV, record crowd for the draft, over 700,000 people flooded into downtown Detroit to see what was a really unexpected draft in a lot of ways, but the beginning of the draft is kind of what everybody expected. Heavy offense. It was a record number of offensive players taken in the first round, and all the quarterbacks went. 6 QBs. What was the thing that jumped out at you with the NFL draft just from the start, from the first round?
Well, looking at what happened last year, looking at what happened this year, the amount of attendees, as you stated, the amount of offensive weaponry, I think, is what NFL teams are really eyeballing. Some teams were looking for wide receivers. Some of them, obviously, as you know, year in and year out, if you don't get the job done with the guy under center, guess what? You go for another guy. You get your guy. Sean Payton had done it. Lots of other teams had done that as well. It didn't really surprise me, the overall ebb and flow of what the quarterback situation was between Caleb Williams being picked first overall by the Chicago Bears does not strike me as odd. They've done this before, and you see other, guys like Justin Fields. We've seen the Jay Cutlers of the world for the Bears, and those guys fall by the wayside. Why? Because of coaching, because the lackluster mindsets when it comes to quarterbacks, and not to thrust these guys into the scene. Is Caleb Williams the most ready to go NFL quarterback? No, he does have some work to do. But I think overall offensively is what we've seen, not to be offended, but to have a lot of offensive efforts that we've seen from all these teams, from coming out of Washington to the Bears. Falcons beefed up. Obviously, they needed a quarterback, which was a big surprise move. I guess no one's more surprised than Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
With Michael Penix being drafted. We could probably talk about that as well at length. But I think overall, offensively, I think it was moving in the right direction. No pun intended. This is going to be probably one of the better NFL seasons with more stars, superstars, guys that are ready to go and ready to play in the National Football League.
Yeah, I think it's a different era, too, because you can safely say that now this is definitively, and I'm going to paraphrase former Royals general manager Dayton Moore. He used to say pitching is the currency of baseball, and he captained that philosophy to taking the Royals to the World Series in 14 and 15. Well, right now, quarterbacking is the currency of football, because you can have whatever defense you want. You can have the best defense in the league. Doesn't matter. If you don't have the quarterback, if that quarterback isn't able to create a few opportunities to separate, you're going to lose. And if you have the great quarterback, case here in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes, you have that equalizer to make up for lots of mistakes, because I think everyone in the country realized, given the glaring weakness on the Chiefs' offense and Rudy Reyes trying out to be a extra in the next Fast and the Furious, the Chiefs were going to take a wide receiver in the first round, because it was just jumped out. That's what you need, because you need to get that quarterback what they need, and that's really the whole key of the game. And you saw that to the extreme in the NFL draft this year, with 6 quarterbacks being taken in the top 12. The teams are willing to go ahead and roll the dice and say, hey, it doesn't matter what else we have. If we don't have this position right, we're toast. And they're giving these guys shorter and shorter leashes. Out of the 2021 draft, only one of those quarterbacks taken still remains on their original team. And that's Trevor Lawrence. Everybody else is gone. So they're not getting the rope that they used to either. These guys that are getting drafted, they're going to have to play real soon, and they better be pretty good, or they'll be next.
Yeah, and it's really about the next man up in all these NFL teams and all the situations. And when you look at guys like the Trevor Lawrences of the world, in lack thereof, and at times he didn't really seem very sure under center as well. He battled injuries. What quarterback doesn't battle injuries? You see guys like retired Ben Roethlisberger dealt with more injuries than any NFL quarterback within his draft class, but yet found a way to come back every single year. Why? Because of the love of the game, because his ability to endure those. types of injuries. Whereas you have other, we had mentioned the Bears and Caleb Williams, and now Michael Penix is a guy who finds himself in a very awkward situation. I can't even imagine the quarterback room and what that's going to feel like when he walks into it there in Atlanta. But I think when you look at the totality of this NFL draft, to kind of surmise all of it, I think everybody got what they wanted. I think everybody got what they needed. Best available player, best player available, best option. There were so many options and still guys that have remained undrafted that are still waiting to get their turn as a priority free agent, if you will, throughout the NFL landscape. So there are still more to come. You mentioned Kansas City Chiefs and Rashid Rice stays in LA. But then here we go. Now the caveat to what that looks like in a real-time NFL team speed, right? We know the NCAA is a very different speed as the NFL is. We see guys have success in transition very well from, you're going to see your Marvin Harrison Jr., who's, I think, got drafted by a very poor team in the Arizona Cardinals. But then again, they've had that mantra for quite some time. But it does give Kyler Murray an option. You stated options. I think that rope is going to tie around like a noose to some of these guys who won't find a way to get it done in the upcoming season.
Yeah, well, that pick makes so much sense because most of the analysts said the pure best player, regardless of position in this draft, was Marvin Harrison Jr. You can put him on the Arizona team. They're comparing him already in Arizona media to Larry Fitzgerald, who's a legend in Arizona and was a great player because Harrison can kind of go over there. Kyler Murray can throw him some 50-50 balls, and he's going to make those plays more often than not. He can elevate Kyler Murray quite a bit. So that was, I thought, a really good pick. The picks that are going to get the most scrutiny, I think, are going to be Drake May going to New England with a team that has a horrendous offensive roster. Just the talent's just not there. You have a defensive coach in Jared Mayo who is a good motivator and has been a good student of the game. But man, if I was hiring a head coach, there's no way I hire a defensive coach right now. I'm hiring an offensive coach. I think the Bears, they had to double down on taking a quarterback high because Matt Eberflus and Luke Getsy basically destroyed Justin Fields' opportunity to be successful. And they're having to double down and waste a number one pick and waste a couple of years of talent to go take Caleb Williams because they burned Justin Fields out. Just
see what happened to Justin
bad
Fields.
Coaching. Yeah, and he's going to Pittsburgh where he's probably going to back up Russell Wilson this year. But I think Justin Fields is your starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers after this season.
I do as well. I look at the Steelers' overall pick, going with the offensive tackle in the very first round. I thought that was a fantastic move. That gives Russell Wilson some insurance under center. It's going to protect his blind side. And more importantly, Dan Moore struggled there on that offensive line for the Steelers. I think that when you look at where they kind of learned on the job in year two. I hate to say they didn't learn on the first year, but now they're learning more in the second year. I think that that very large body, the massive body that Fontanu has, is going to correlate well. Another Polynesian guy who comes from a very similar background as Troy Polamalu, work ethic wise, play mentality, most NFL ready offensive linemen. There was more runs of offensive linemen in this draft than I've seen in any recent memory. But to your point in regards to the quarterback position, the doubling down of the Chicago Bears is something that, again, I expected to see. I didn't know that it was going to be Caleb Williams until the writing was on the wall. And I thought to myself, well, he did have a conversation with them. He did have dinner with them. And I think once that's done, that's, there was a writing on the wall. Is Caleb Williams the best fit there in Chicago? Probably not. But will they destroy him and his playability, his football IQ, or enable him to get to that next level? Do they have another starter? Can he sit back for a year? The answer to all that is no. They don't, and they haven't. Why? Because organizational failures, from coaching staff to ownership to scouting. This has just been an ongoing situation. You mentioned Drake May. Drake May is going to probably more of a formidable organization now than Gerard Mayo is the guy calling the shots and has a basically a general manager to have that conversation with, because Bill
Mm-hmm.
Belichick was the kind of the 3-in-1 jury, judge, and
So
executioner.
we're
But
talking
now
about Caleb Williams, and he's stepping into a situation where, honestly, I mean, look at Chicago. I mean, what good quarterbacks have they had in Chicago? You can look back to Jim McMahon, and really, Jay Cutler had a few stats, but I mean, that's been a quarterback graveyard for years. And, hopefully Caleb Williams has enough to turn it around. They have invested some money around him. They do have a new offensive coordinator, so maybe he has a shot. But, out of the highly drafted rookie quarterbacks, the guy I think is set up the most for success is J.J. McCarthy going to the Minnesota Vikings.
I think JJ McCarthy has his work cut out for him, to be honest with you. He actually has a very finally more tuned machine in Minnesota. Yes, they have their third-year head coach, and I actually like that pick. Is JJ McCarthy NFL ready? No, not really. But he does have a national championship under his belt. He is familiar with their offense and how they run that there. I think there's a lot to be desired in regards to some of the additional weapons he'll have offensively, whether or not they can get deals done and restructure contracts to make it make sense from a financial perspective. That's really going to be the bread and butter, and that's how JJ McCarthy is going to get acclimated to. On the other side of that coin, Bryce Young, who was first picked overall last year, we've seen the offensive line fold like a deck of cards there in Carolina. He has his work cut out for him in a very, very big way. Why? Because he doesn't have the weapons.
No,
Did Carolina do themselves any justice with some of the draft picks? Yeah, they did. But did they get really what they actually should have? Should they have moved up in the draft? Only Omar Khan has the answer. Excuse me, not Omar Khan, but their general manager has a little bit to say about that. But at the same token, I think that when you look at Carolina, they did get some picks. I like the Xavier Leggett pick from out of South Carolina. He's fast. He has some odd production associated with him. But don't forget, outside of his final collegiate season, he didn't really do a whole lot. I mean, he had a high
no.
receiving yardage in 23. He only had 167 yards, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he exploded onto the scene. And scouts like, yeah, he's going to be the next big, Marvin Harrison Jr. type of
Mm-hmm.
guy. Which I actually like his production. He's really good. So that may give Bryce Young that talent, that spark to really do something with this guy, whether you put him in the slot or you get him in the backfield. He has a relatively larger body, a larger frame, so he has the propensity of being that guy from behind the backfield to make something happen from the line of scrimmage. It's just a question of whether or not they can utilize his talents to the best of his ability to get this team on track, somehow on track or on a track to get to some type of wins in the upcoming season. But then my least favorite pick was that Jonathan Brooks because he came off of a torn ACL. I take nothing away from rehab. I know the rehab is a real thing, but I just don't know that he's the most dynamic back. They could have moved up in that regard to get someone, but they didn't. They ended themselves with Brooks. We'll find out what Brooks has as the season comes to a start.
Well, right off the bat in the first round, there's two picks that just jump out to me as utterly insane. One, of course, is Atlanta. They just signed Kirk Cousins, huge contract, and you mentioned it earlier. I think Kirk Cousins actually is probably about the best player to be in that position because he's universally considered a great teammate, a great team guy, hardest working person in the league. So I don't think he's going to bury Michael Penix Jr. I think he actually will probably see some common ground in him because Michael Penix has had to overcome injuries. And I think shares some ability. They're both good arms, not a lot of mobility. I think they'll get along well, and I think Kirk Cousins will be a good teammate for him. But you're the general manager of the Falcons. You just went to your owner. You just went to Arthur Blank and said, hey, I'm going to sign Kirk Cousins. We need to give him this money guaranteed. This is the guy we need him because we're close. We're going to win. Then your next best option to add talent to get over the top, you draft a quarterback to replace Kirk Cousins. I mean, what the hell are you doing? How do you do that? How does that justify? That's insane. It's
I
the
don't know.
NFL now. Don't build for 10 years. He kept referencing back to Steve Young being taken by the Niners when they had Joe Montana, or Aaron Rodgers being taken when you had Brett Favre. That was a different era. This is the salary cap era. This is free agency. By the time Michael Penix Jr. is ready to get on the field, you're having to renew his contract. You don't even get him cheap. The advantage of having a young quarterback is gone because you morons took the guy at the same time as you signed a guy to a 4-year contract with enough guaranteed money. He's basically untradeable. The only way Penix Jr. gets in the game is if you made an unmitigated disaster with Kirk Cousins and he can't play and you can't dump him.
Well, we know that we get from Kirk Cousins, though. It's not. This isn't a magical mystery tour. We know exactly what we get from Kirk Cousins. We've seen it in every single team that he's been to. He gets injured, he's out. Yeah, great teammate. I say I take nothing away from his ability to be a great teammate, but what does that translate to when you're not on the field? You're not available. Best ability is availability. He doesn't have that. He's getting older. He's been injured. And of course, if you want to throw this in the pot, he lost 32 points to the New England Patriots and didn't have an answer for them offensively against them in the second half. So with that being said, we know what we get from Kirk Cousins. Michael Penix Jr., on the other hand, is a 2.0 version of who Kirk Cousins was. And I say was in past tense because we know that at some point during the season, he's going to be injured and they're going to call up Penix to do what he does best. He is the most NFL-ready quarterback, and I've said this before, that was taken out of any of the big Power 10 schools, Big 15, the Big 10, the Pac-12. This guy is legit and ready to go. So he's going to replace Kirk Cousins happily because teams don't want to wait forever. They want to get it done now. That's why they rolled the dice and grabbed Penix and make it basically an insurance policy. Will they pick up the 5th-year option? Well, they may not have a choice but pick up his 5th-year option or re-sign him to a new contract because he's only going to see very limited playing time. And I can tell you this right now, he's going to see some preseason playing time this season, guaranteed.
God, he has to. I mean, it's truly insane. I don't know how that conversation goes. And I mean, you have to think Arthur Blank had to be on board with it because otherwise, well, maybe not. I mean, if we see the GM get fired Tuesday, then he wasn't on board with it. The other one that made absolutely no sense to me, the Las Vegas Raiders. Their best offensive pick last year was a tight end. They decided to hire, like I said, I would not do. They hired a defensive coach, and Antonio Pierce, man, he's a good motivator. He's an exciting guy. The players like him. Hey, that's all great. So was Romeo Crennel, and he failed everywhere. But you got Antonio. Yeah, you got Antonio Pierce. He's your head coach. So you need somebody to run the offense. So who do you go get? They got the single worst offensive coordinator available outside of Nathaniel Hackett, Luke Getsy, who destroyed the offense in Chicago. You had the best running quarterback in the league, and your advice to him is stay in the pocket and pass with Justin Fields. That's the guy you have running it. And your draft pick took a tight end. So what's the philosophy for the Raiders? We're going to have Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew battling it out, and we're going to go 2 tight end offense.
You're not going to get any ground whatsoever on that. Don't forget, last year there was a market for their running back, and that didn't go over very well, especially when you're trying to shop him in the Hall of Fame game. Now, with that being said, I don't know that picking Brock Bowers was the ultimate answer. I would say Jackson Powers-Johnson was probably their best pick in the entire NFL draft in every round that they had available to them because, I mean, he went 44th overall. He's a guard out of Oregon. They need to protect AOC. Whether or not AOC is that guy, which I don't think that he is, they need to make some very solid moves. And getting Getsy in there, more like get out, because that's basically what's going to happen at the end of this season. I don't think they're going to progress any think past maybe an 8-8 season. Look, I love Antonio Pierce, as you mentioned. The guy is a true Raider to the end of his dying days. But when it's all said and done, I just don't know overall that Delmar Glaze is the answer on the offensive tackle side. He's not very experienced. He's had some injuries. I mean, in round 7, they get a guy from Air Force, a guy out of Pitt, which is Devonshire, which could actually be one of their shining stars, especially when you look at him, because you earn a spot once you get past the special teams play. I mean, bottom line, you get past special teams, you have an option as a receiver to get to even touch the field on part of a 53 starting roster. So I think Devonshire is a guy who's going to be in the rough for a minute. I just don't know that they got what they should have, and they should have went up and grabbed a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, my God, I mean, and if you're going to go with AOC, I mean, you have as much chance of winning in the AFC West with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez playing quarterback for you than you do with Aidan O'Connell. I mean, honestly.
You're right. You're right.
But you can borrow her from Congress. It would be a weird move, but if somebody's going to do it, it would be the Raiders. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez could line up at quarterback, and they have as much chance of winning and making the playoffs as they do with Aidan O'Connell. And if you're Devontae Adams and you're sitting there well, I mean, hey, at least it's Las Vegas. It's a great city. But, I mean, you're sitting there with the Raiders. You got to be thinking, wait a minute, man. I came here because my best friend, my college classmate, the godfather of my kids, my next-door neighbor's the quarterback, and we're going to do it together. Well, he's in New Orleans now, and you're stuck here with the second most popular, depending on what area of the country you're in. I guess he could be more popular. The second or the first most popular AOC playing quarterback, and your option 2 is Gardner Minshew, and you're going up against Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and now Jim Harbaugh is coaching the Chargers, and Jim Harbaugh has proven wherever he's at, he wins.
Yeah, he did in San Francisco as well. So being his second stint in the NFL, and not only that, he gets to go against his brother as they'll play the Baltimore Ravens this year as well. So this is going to be interesting for Jim Harbaugh, but I think it's more of a telltale sign that things may not be changing in Las Vegas with the Raiders or whatever city they happen to be in, because the same old Raiders found themselves in the same situation in Oakland as they have found themselves, despite having a very nice new stadium out in right off the strip. It's absolutely fabulous. I mean, fabulous from the onset. They have the globe there. I mean, there's everything there. What they don't have is a legitimate shot to get through the AFC West, as long as AOC is a quarterback and you don't have someone to throw to Devontae Adams, not to mention not having other highlighted weaponry in the upcoming season to throw to get those very critical first downs, much less touchdowns. Because if it's not a touchdown, it's a throwaway, or you just take a knee and you're going to win the game. So
you're going to play a double tight end formation. And then they double down because their second round pick, if you look at NFL Focus, the single least important position on the field is center. Pro Football Focus, it's always the single least significant position in terms of win or loss. So what do the Raiders add with their second round pick? Number 44 overall. Should get a good player. This guy's going to have to start. You burned a second round pick on him. Jackson Powers Johnson, a center out of Oregon.
He's your shining star.
Yeah. How do you do that? I mean, you come out of the first and second round with a tight end and a center, and your second best player on offense is already a tight end. I mean, it's crazy.
I scream bunch formation for the Raiders.
Yeah, my God, we're going to go heavy formation. We're going to get an H-back too. We'll go with the triple option.
But at least line too.
Yeah, but the good thing is at least you have immobile quarterbacks since you're going to run heavy. So
right.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Now, another team that honestly just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and you wonder how they painted themselves into this position, the Denver Broncos, they get Bo Nix, and Bo Nix may well be good, but He's going to be on a team that doesn't have a lot of draft capital, traded away a ton of it, and buried themselves salary cap wise in getting Russell Wilson. And the question you have to ask if you're a Broncos fan is, in the spirit of it being a presidential election year, are we better off now than we were 4 years ago? Maybe not quite 4 years ago, but would the Broncos have been better off just committing to a guy who got a $5 million free agency contract in Drew Lock to go be the backup for the Giants? And you know he's going to end up playing this year.
Guaranteed.
Should he have just been the commitment as the starting quarterback for the Broncos? And maybe you're in a better position because you would have had years of draft picks and you would have had salary cap money. Now you have neither, and you got Bo Nix coming in to be your starting quarterback after Russell Wilson and Sean Payton just couldn't get along and flamed it out, and they scorched their salary cap for 2 years.
Yeah, they really didn't put themselves in a very good situation. And whether or not Sean Payton wants to admit it or not, he was part of that decision-making process. He was given the authority by the owner to be the general manager and to be the head coach and to take those responsibilities on that he may not have had when he was a coach in New Orleans. And and by the way, that team didn't do any picks when it came to what they had done when Sean Payton decided to say, you know what, you guys get a free draft pick because I'm out of here. I don't even want to be here anymore. I'm done. Sorry, Mickey Loomis, but I got to go. And that's exactly what happened. So there was a draft pick associated with it. And I think they utilized that in maybe Oregon and wide receiver Tony Franklin. They do have a very hard-nosed RB in Audric Estime. I think that they have nothing but upside to them. But outside of Nix and outside of those two guys I had mentioned on the offensive side of the ball, the only thing they did on the defensive side of the ball, besides not being able to stop the run or cover the pass when they needed to consistently, is Jonathan Ellis up front, which I take nothing away from him because he's an edge rusher. But when you don't have the true nose guard, when you don't have the true guy in the middle to knock down the dominoes, to apply pressure, that secondary is going to be roasted every single day. And of course, there's no conversation in regards to Justin Simmons in the secondary for the Broncos either in relation to whether or not they're going to keep him. So Justin Simmons is on the fence. I met Justin Simmons in his last contract conversation back in 2020 during the COVID year. And one thing he said was, you know what, I'm here. Whatever happens, happens. I had a chance to interview him and talk to him. Very nice guy. I interviewed him when he came out of Boston College. Probably the best thing to come out of Boston College in, well, a long time.
Yeah.
And the bottom line to that is that they need to worry about the people, the guys up front. Good thing there are supplemental drafts. Good thing that there are guys that are still on the waiting on the wings on the outside of the Broncos facility, knocking on the door trying to get in because they may have more of an opportunity than they think, at least on the defensive side of the ball. And maybe they need another weapon on the offensive side of the ball. But because they're cash strapped, because of that horrible deal with Russell Wilson, now you find yourself in cap hell. What do we do? Where do we go? How do we get these guys? They didn't do a whole lot in free agency. Why? Because they had to deal with Russell Wilson. And at that point, they had no money to do anything at all. They didn't restructure contracts, which they should have done. And even if they had done it, it wouldn't have been that much anyway. It would have not gave them any more real cap room because you're not really paying your stars much, well, next to anything. So the Broncos, for all intents and purposes, I don't know how they even got the grade, but I got them as a D, like overall, like dumb. Like I'm not even saying failure. It was just dumb moves, and all because of that cash trap deal with Russell Wilson. Now, who finds himself in a very more positive, more fluid situation. The Steelers basically got him for dimes on the dollar, as well as Justin Fields for pennies on the dollar, even more so. I think in the overall totality of the NFL, I think that you can't have any better of a backup quarterback situation to Russell Wilson than Justin Fields, who has more upside than any other backup quarterback in the NFL, period.
Yeah,
so
and
what the Steelers do with it?
Fields is a guy wherever he's played, the teammates love him. The Bears players were disappointed he was moved on. I mean, I think a lot of the Bears teammates blamed Luke Getsy and Matt Eberflus for the failures. It's very different than another quarterback that was moved on from and ironically went to Denver, Zach Wilson. I don't think there was too many Jets players that were upset that Zach Wilson was going. But I think what you see is winning teams keep winning, losing teams keep losing. The Steelers with Mike Tomlin seem to be positioned to be in a great opportunity to take a jump because even with the horrendous quarterbacking they got last year between Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky and
Mason
whoever else they
Rudolph.
ran out there, Mason Rudolph,
Mason Rudolph.
who's I
Yeah.
think he's ready for the retirement pension now because he's been a backup quarterback for so long. They made it to the playoffs with those guys. With Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, they're an automatic contender doing nothing else because they're going to be well coached. They're not going to make mistakes. They're going to put themselves in a position to win. And they have a new offensive coordinator who's not going to be flashy, but it's a guy who, while he failed as a head coach with the Falcons, he was a really good offensive coordinator in Tennessee. And I think when you get Arthur Smith as the OC with the Steelers, he's going to put them in a position to win, and they're not going to make mistakes. They're going to play Steeler football, run the ball into the ground, and they got quarterbacks that are mobile. They can throw the ball long. They'll make the use of their strengths, and they'll be in a position to win. And yeah, I think Justin Fields he may well be one of the most successful young quarterbacks because you got to figure at some point he's going to get the opportunity to play this year.
Well, not only that, but these guys share a lot of philosophies that are the same. This is having the escapability outside of the pocket. When the pressure gets to you, you run out of the pocket, you make throws on the run, and that's something Russell Wilson has done his entire career. He's already won a Super Bowl ring. There's a lot that he can show and train, and and we have seen this in very few occasions. You mentioned Zach Wilson, and I think being coached up by Aaron Rodgers, despite his early exit from the NFL season last year, taught him a whole lot, often, daily, weekly, during meetings, post meetings, at practice. And I think that's one of the things that Russell Wilson may be able to pay homage to people that have came before him, those that have trained him, and will give Justin Fields a shot to be a legitimate quarterback in a legitimate system with Arthur Smith possibly calling the plays and/or feeling the trust of either one of these quarterbacks to make the decisions that aren't on their wrist.
Yeah, no, I think he'll have a good shot to make it work. Let's talk about one of the other teams that really was kind of tumultuous over the last year. They moved on from Sam Howell at quarterback, the predecessor of Drake May at North Carolina. Eric Bieniemy, no longer involved with the Washington Commanders, not a head coach in the NFL. He's back to the collegiate ranks. But the Commanders, moving forward, they get Jaden Daniels. They're going to go with another young quarterback and another team that really has been searching for a direction since Kirk Cousins moved on. Do you think Washington is in a position to succeed, or is it going to be a long year for Jaden Daniels?
You know what? I like the way that they're set up now. They have a new regime. They're trying to rebuild who they were before all the debacleist things that had transpired behind the screens and giving the cheerleaders a bad rap and a bad name. And ownership clearly, was the exchange factor as well, as most NFL owners had agreed to in the meeting to help that team find other means to get them out from under Dan Snyder's evil, twisted thumb. So with that being said, Sam Howell, he was okay. I don't know that he was great. He was good, but he wasn't great, and he wasn't NFL ready. And I seen that during the draft, and I just scratched my head and said, what? Who? It's kind of like the New York Giants and their selection of Daniel Jones out of Duke. Since when has Duke had any Hall of Fame quarterbacks? Wait, that's zero. And so for them to take that pick certainly kind of lined up the rest of the NFC saying, well, you know what? They took a chance on Daniel Jones. I think we'll take a chance at Sam Howell. I think that was a horrible choice. But now Jane Daniels, who comes from my hometown, by the way, shout out to Jane Daniels from San Bernardino, California,
there you go.
Who gets picked up by the Commanders. I like the move. I don't know that it's my favorite pick, but they definitely need somebody under center who can get acclimated quickly. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. He was a winner at LSU. He had done so many great things, great teammate, great person. He dealt with tons of adversity. Of course, when you're from San Bernardino, California, you have adversities because that's where you're from. That place is not good. It's not formidable for anyone. But I think overall, if you want to talk about a risk factor, he probably has the most risk factor outside of Drake May. Why? Because he's not quite NFL ready yet. Drake May, not NFL ready yet. But when you look at guys that are Bo Nix, yeah, he has a splash of that. But
Sure.
going back to Michael Penix Jr., also the most ready, acclimated quarterback. And I think that's what Atlanta was really looking forward to, was someone that can get up to speed faster and quicker. I think Jane Daniels certainly, who obviously shares the same name as my youngest daughter, Jane. So there's a lot of correlations. He's not NFL ready yet. He needs some work up. He needs some coaching up. He needs to, basically sit behind whomever they start. He's not a plug and play guy. So it's going to take time, but I like the move. I like the pick. I don't love the pick, but I like the pick. But then they got a lot of complementary pieces, right? They have Brandon Coleman at a TCU. They went with guys on the other side of the ball as well. They beefed up in the secondary. Yeah. They beefed up front as well with Jean Baptiste. They went to Jazard Newton on the defensive line. So I think they're answering a lot of those questions on the defensive side of the ball. My question is whether or not they're relying on the defense to get the offense back the ball and better positioning on the field. And if so, Jaden Daniels is fantastic in short field play. So we'll see. This is a story that will be unfolding sooner than later in the NFL.
Yeah, they did benefit from all the offensive players that went in the first round. They got one of the highest ranked defensive players by almost everybody pre-draft, Cooper DeJean, in the second round. So they did add a little bit of talent. It wasn't a disastrous draft like some teams. Let's go ahead as we're winding down here. I do want to hit on my hometown team here, the Kansas City Chiefs, my adopted hometown team of the Chiefs. The Browns really kind of sat out this draft. This was the last year where they were paying for Deshaun Watson still. So hopefully Deshaun can play some, because otherwise that's your Browns draft. That was easy one. That was an easy one to wrap up. The Chiefs, they went ahead and they trade a third round pick away. They move up and they acquire the fastest wide receiver in the history of the NFL Combine, Xavier Worthy out of Texas. He ran a 4.2140. So he is going to pair with Hollywood Brown, and your top four receivers for the Chiefs now going into the season: Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy, Rudy Reyes, depending if he's able to play or not, and Justin Watson. That's a lot better lineup than the Chiefs had going into last season. Yeah. So I think if you're Kansas City, if you're Patrick Mahomes, you got to be pretty happy with that pick.
You're absolutely happy with that pick. My favorite pick was Kingsley Sumataya out of BYU. Right. He brings a center of gravity that most players don't have. There was the best pick. I think it was the best pick outside of the Steelers picking their offensive tackle out of Oregon. This guy is a working machine. He has some upside. He has a lot of raw playability to what he brings. But overall, look, if the Chiefs can train these guys, and their offensive line coach is absolutely fantastic, by the way, who's been in the NFL for many, many years, will help him develop his skill set, will develop better footwork, better hand work, being able to get guys and follow plays throughout from beginning to the end to get those guys to the ground so they are of no consequence to Patrick Mahomes, because we know, above all else, he scrambles like eggs. You don't know when it's going to happen, but when it does, you better be ready for it. And most teams have not been, especially not in the AFC West. So yeah, and then you have the speed kills with Xavier Worthy, who is worthy of this fantastic honor to play with Patrick Mahomes and the speedy offense. And I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. They're going to have Hollywood Brown. They're going to have Xavier Worthy. There's so much to like about this Chiefs team. However, his frame is not very big at 165 pounds. So he's going to have to beef up. He's going to have to bulk up, and he may be a complimentary, because he's not big enough to play the wide receiver one, at least not at this point. Give him a year, maybe two, let him beef up, let him grow, and see what happens. But you know what? Speed kills in the NFL, and I can see this Mahomes to Worthy conversation probably expanding a lot farther. Now, don't forget they went with Jared Wiley, right? Because we know at a tight end out of TCU,
Yep.
we know that their current tight end situation is getting up there in age, and of course, he's spending more time with Taylor Swift and in Kelsey and Travis Kelsey, which may take away from football. I don't know. He says it doesn't, but we'll see. Jaden Hicks, safety in the secondary. Huzzard out of Penn State on that offensive line. They really had a pretty good draft overall. I think between them and the Steelers, both getting aged for me in regards to the players when they picked them in round 263 for Sumataya. I think was a steal. I think other teams could have easily bought into his raw capabilities and playability on the field. They could have moved up and grabbed Jaden Hicks, but he was low-hanging fruit out of Washington State. Pick 4 and 133. I mean, look, the bottom line is this. They could have moved up, but they had enough capital. They had enough draft capital. They had restructured in the offseason for quite a few players on that roster. They did it the right way, and they got what they needed. And I think it's going to benefit them, again, to win another AFC West title because other teams within that dynamic, we don't know what the Chargers hold. We don't know what that looks like for Jim Harbaugh and that draft class currently, and not even that, but let's not cut out Justin Herbert from that conversation as well because he's a gunslinger.
He
comes from old school gunslinging mentality. I want to see him take the next step. And I think that coaching was a huge part of why he did not bloom and prosper in the way that I thought he was. And not only that, but he battled tons of injuries with that throwing hand and the non-throwing hand. So we'll see what happens. But I think, again, the Chiefs will go back to winning another AFC West title, at least based on this draft, based on past drafts, what they've done with those players. And they found a lot of low-hanging fruit in drafts leading up to this one, and they've been superstars. So,
hey, you got to like the tight end out of TCU too, because he led Division I college football with the least drops over the last 3 years. He only dropped one ball. The NFL Pro Football Focus review of him said he has vacuum cleaner hands. One drop, and he had the most touchdown receptions of any tight end in college football. And then for Kingsley, in the spirit of our sister station, Wrestling Spotlight, he's part of the bloodline, so we can acknowledge him. His cousin is the right tackle for the Detroit Lions, who just signed a $120 million contract, Penny Sewell. So part of that Samoan bloodline, just like your tribal chief, the former undisputed Universal Heavyweight Champion of the world, Roman Reigns, and The Rock. So there we go. We're building. We're trying to find that wrestling connection. But I think the Chiefs did do a good job. Yeah, I think the Chiefs did do a good job, and they set themselves up to succeed. Now, obviously, everybody can celebrate the draft. Everybody can say they had a great draft, and that's what everybody's going to do. They're going to spin it because, honestly, nobody knows for sure until a couple months down the road. Training camps open up, and then we get a little exhibition football. And at that point, we can really start digging in and see what these guys can do. Rudy, when can people hear from you on the Fired Up Network as we roll through the week here?
Tuesdays and Wednesdays, my show is on. I will have Vince Ferragamo, former quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams, on my show. Trying to acquire some other great names as well. I'm typically on in the afternoon. So go to the RudDogShow.com. I have tons of interviews, almost 10 years worth of coverage from some of your favorite players and guys you may not even know about and guys you may want to learn more about after listening. So you can find me on Twitter as well at RudDogReyes on X, Rudy R. Reyes on Instagram, basically everywhere, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. I'm not hard to find.
Terrific. And you can see me on TimeOut on the Fired Up Network and on Wrestling Spotlight. This week we're going to be joined by Ian Valentino from NFL Draft Study, and he's going to help us break down the draft a little bit more, and then we'll talk about how it impacts the Kansas City Chiefs, and also we'll get into the week that was for Sporting Kansas City and the Kansas City Current as we wrap up that week of Kansas City sports. For Rudy Reyes, I'm Gerald Bentley. Thanks for watching this breakdown of the NFL Draft from 2024 right here on the Fired Up Network. Stay tuned for more sports talk and more